Global shock from The Guardian of the UK. As the narrative collapses with a bang, it takes the breath away from the elites, the leaders and politicians of the Western world who participated in this WEF Davos meeting in Switzerland. That takes place every year. The Guardian, the historical newspaper of Great Britain, reveals Byzantine intrigues and nests of vipers, quote unquote, at the Davos Economic Forum. Klaus Schwab selects his leaders using the same criteria Putin uses to select deputies for the State Duma of Russia: loyalty, guile, and sex appeal. According to the Clockwork Orange of Greece, after the sudden resignation of Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, who has been fanatical about the implementation of the lockdown orders and the almost violent imposition of COVID-19 vaccinations, and having to do with problems with the vaccinated people in every corner of the world, come historic newspaper of Great Britain, The Guardian, with a revelatory article signed by Mr. Larry Elliott to shake the planet as he describes that something rotten, sick and hideous is hiding in the Davos Economic Forum, the World Economic Forum Summit, by characteristically describing the leadership of Klaus Schwab and the quote-unquote non-existence that surround him like a nest of vipers. Wow, that's pretty strong. And let's remember, this is written in The Guardian. The future of Klaus Schwab, Mr. Davos, for more than half a century, has become a point of discussion at this year's meeting after World Economic Forum officials have been heavily critical of his presidency and lack of a succession strategy. Let's remember he's 82 years old. In another article I read he was 85. Anyway, the group of current and former WEF staff contacted by The Guardian said the 82-year-old Schwab was a law unto himself and was surrounded by zeros and nobodies who were not capable of running the organization he founded in the early 1970s. The group said, Klaus has been at the helm of the WEF for 52 years. When he was born in 1938, 122 of the 195 states in the world at this time did not even exist. Klaus gives no reason to anyone. He is completely uncontrollable. He is a complete horse to anyone inside and outside the organization, the group said. Davos's elite will need to do some soul-searching in a collapsing world, notes Larry Elliott in his Guardian article. He says, we are a group of current and former WEF employees. We want to play our part in advancing the conversation about the role this organization plays in the world. The group said it wished to remain anonymous. Quote, we are hesitant to come forward as Klaus is very well connected and can make life very difficult for us even after we leave the WEF. End quote. Well, that's very strange. They're so frightened of him. He can make their life difficult even after they leave the WEF? Wow. Speculation about Schwab's future has intensified this week after an article in the online publication by Politico saying that WEF strategic partners, the companies that fund the $390 million a year business, were unhappy with the lack of strategic succession. So they don't know who's going to be taking over for Klaus Schwab. The group of WEF staff members said they had posted their criticisms on social media platform LinkedIn, but they had been removed at the WEF's request, which the organization denies. The post shared with The Guardian said, there is not much future for the WEF beyond Klaus, not only because there is no clear successor, but also because its board is such a viper's nest where the senior leadership they are at each other's throats the moment the old man will die suddenly. I shouldn't laugh, I'm sorry. The group of they're a bunch of, vipers in a viper's nest. Now, a WS spokesperson said, the Board of Trustees decides on any future institutional leadership appointments. The forum has a strong institutional governance structure to ensure its continued ability to fully support its mission. Former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair is one of the leading international figures to be linked with the role. The panel of former and current WEF employees questioned the organization's ability to function without Schwab at the helm. Quote, "In most organizations, the next generation of top leadership is dimly visible at the highest levels of management, but at WEF, Klaus has surrounded himself with such a group of non-existents, quote unquote, at the top that it's hard to see how any of them could be taken seriously," end quote, by someone influential inside or outside the organization, they said. They said Klaus chooses his leaders using the same criteria Putin uses to choose deputies for the State Duma, that is, loyalty, guile, and sex appeal. The quality of the people at the top reflects the type of people who work for the rest of the organization, they said. The head of a British company agreed that there appears to be no successor to Schwab. The executive said, "My impression is that he will die with his boots on, always being active." Another who commented hears that the Davos Forum sessions express surprise that Schwab allows speculation about his future to surface. Quote, "He should have known it was going to happen and take steps to prevent it," end quote, the person said. The World Economic Forum is a Swiss foundation and has no shareholders. Only at this 2023 summit events occur that reveal that the founder of WEF seems to have lost control, such as the crash of the CEO of Pfizer, who for 6 minutes walked the snowy streets of Davos surrounded by reporters, between them two great Jewish journalist investigators who rattled 29 unanswered questions in his face that Albert Bourla only managed to mutter was, "Have a nice day, have a nice day, have a nice day." That's all he could say. Caught him. Rebel News pummels Pfizer CEO with questions at World Economic Forum. And as the winter Davos summit is underway in Switzerland, the forum's official website reports. Last year's Global Risks report, published by the World Economic Forum, warned that a divergent economic recovery from COVID-19 could deepen divisions, even as cooperation is urgently needed. But despite the harsh lessons about the interdependence of global risks, few anticipated the extent of the instability that would unfold next, this time due to a new war in Europe. The 2023 edition of the report examines the relevant geopolitical tensions and confluence of socioeconomic risks and identifies the most serious risk perceived over the next 2 years. This transformation map is intended to add context to the report by linking it to relevant topics and providing up-to-date research and analysis. And there's the list of the participants in WEF, and then the welcome of the founder of the forum, Klaus Schwab, as well as the counterparts of the president of the commission, Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen. But let's see the impressive prediction of the coming pandemic as it appears in the official website of the forum. October 15, 2019, the pandemic simulation, called Event 201, which was to take place 3 days later in New York, October 18, 2019, was published on the WEF website. The pandemic simulation was done to prepare the leaders' response to the possibility of a pandemic that would materialize almost simultaneously if we take into account the subsequent criticism of China for its delay in informing the world public opinion. Event 201 was sponsored by the WEF together with the Gates Foundation and Johns Hopkins, a U.S. private research university based in Baltimore. The real pandemic would follow soon after. The most extensive portrait of Schwab bears the signature of Mr. Johnny Vedmore, who is a freelance investigative journalist from Cardiff, Wales. As the 2023 summit is underway, let's see who is the initiator of the forum according to the research of the particular journalist. On the morning of September 11, 2001, we remember what happened then, Klaus Schwab was in Park East, New York, and witnessed one of the most spectacular events of the next 20 years as planes hit the 2 World Trade Center buildings. Today, 2 decades later, Klaus Schwab once again sits in the front row of another generation-defining moment in modern human history. Seemingly always having a front row seat when tragedy strikes, Schwab's proximity to world-changing events likely stems from being one of the most well-connected people on Earth. As the driving force behind the World Economic Forum, the international organization for public-private cooperation, Schwab has courted heads of state, top business executives, and the elite of academic and scientific circles at Davos for more than 50 years. More recently, he has also flirted with the ire of many for his most recent role as the head of the Great Reset, a sweeping effort to remake civilization worldwide for the benefit of the World Economic Forum elite and its allies. Schwab, speaking at the forum's annual meeting January 2021, emphasized that building trust would be integral to the success of the Great Reset, signaling the continued expansion of the initiative's already massive public relations campaign. Although Schwab called for building trust through an unspecified progress, trust is usually facilitated through transparency. Perhaps this is why many find it difficult to trust Schwab and his motivations, as little is known about his history and biography prior to the founding of World Economic Forum in the early 1970s. Like many prominent leaders of the elite-backed agenda, Schwab's online record has been well scrubbed, making it difficult to find information about his early history as well as information about his family. However, having been born in Ravensburg, Germany in 1938, many have speculated in recent months that Schwab's family may have had some connection with the Axis war effort, ties that, if made public, could threaten the reputation of the World Economic Forum and bring about unwanted scrutiny of his mission and motivations. Unlimited Hangouts Investigations explores in detail the past that Klaus Schwab has worked to hide and reveals the Schwab family's involvement not only in the Nazi quest for the atomic bomb, but also in South Africa's illegal nuclear program to apartheid. Particularly revealing is the story of Klaus's father, Eugene Schwab, who led the Nazi-backed German branch of the Swiss engineering company in the war as a prominent army contractor. The company Escher Wyss, WYSS, would use slavery to produce machinery valuable to the Nazi war effort, as well as heavy water for their nuclear program. And years later, at the same company, a young man, Klaus Schwab, served on the board when the decision was made to equip South Africa's racist apartheid regime with the necessary equipment to advance its quest to become a nuclear power. With the World Economic Forum now a prominent proponent of nuclear non-proliferation and clean nuclear power, Klaus Schwab's past makes him a poor spokesman for his purported agenda for the present and the future. However, digging even deeper into his activities, it becomes clear that Schwab's real role has long been to shape global, regional, and industrial agendas of the present in order to ensure the continuity of larger, much older plans discredited after World War II, not only nuclear technology but also population control policies influenced by eugenics, a set of beliefs and practices aimed at improving the genetic quality of the population. A story for Swabia. On July 10, 1870, Klaus Schwab's grandfather, Jacob Wilhelm Gottfried Schwab, later referred to simply as Gottfried, was born in Germany in a war with its French neighbors. Karlsruhe, the city where Gottfried Schwab was born, was part of the Grand Duchy of Baden, ruled in 1870 by 43-year-old Grand Duke of Baden, Frederick I. The following year, the aforementioned Duke would be present at the proclamation of the German Empire, which took place in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles in France. He was the only son-in-law of Emperor William I, and as Frederick I was one of the rulers of Germany, when Gottfried Schwab turned 18, Germany would see Wilhelm II take the throne after the death of his father, Frederick III. In 1893, 23-year-old Gottfried Schwab would officially leave Germany, having renounced German citizenship to immigrate to Switzerland. At that time, his occupation was a baker. Here, Gottfried would meet Mary Lapart, who was from the Kirchberg near Bern, Switzerland, and who was 5 years his junior. The two would marry in Roggwil, Bern on May 27, 1898, and the following year, on April 27, 1899, their child, Eugene Schwab, was born. At the time of Eugene's birth, Gottfried Schwab had developed professionally into a mechanical engineer. When Eugene was about 1 year old, Gottfried and Mary Schwab decided to return to live in Karlsruhe, and Gottfried again applied for German citizenship. Eugene Schwab would follow in his father's footsteps and also become a mechanical engineer, and in later years he would advise his children to do the same. Eugene Schwab would eventually start working in a factory in a town in Upper Swabia, southern Germany, the capital of Ravensburg district of Baden-Württemberg. The factory where he would carve out his career was the German branch of a Swiss company called Escher Wyss. Switzerland had many long-standing economic links with the Ravensburg area, with Swiss traders in the early 1970s bringing yarn and textile products. The same period, Ravensburg delivered grain to Rorschach deep in the Swiss Alps until 1870, along with breeding stock and various cheeses. Between 1809 and 1837, 375 Swiss lived in Ravensburg, although the Swiss population had fallen to 133 by 1910. In the 1830s, skilled Swiss workers established a cotton factory with an integrated bleaching and fish finishing plant owned and operated by Arf Brothers. The Ravensburg horse market, established around 1840, also attracted many from Switzerland, especially after the opening of the railway line from Ravensburg to Friedrichshafen, a town located on nearby Lake Constance on the border of Switzerland and Germany in 1847. Grain merchants from Rorschach made regular visits to the Ravensburg workshop, and eventually this cross-border cooperation and trade also led to the opening of a branch in the city, the Zurich engine factory, Escher Wyss and C. This was made possible when the train line connected Zurich to the German route network was completed between 1850 and 1853. The factory was founded by Walter Zuppinger between 1856 and 1859 and would start production in 1860. In 1861, we can see the first official patent of the manufacturers of Escher Wyss in Ravensburg referred to special installations with mechanical looms for weaving ribbon. At the time, the Ravensburg branch of Escher Wyss would be run by Walter Zuppinger and would be where he developed his tangential turbine, where he won a number of additional patents. In 1870, Zuppinger, together with others, also established a paper mill in Bainford near Ravensburg. He himself retired in 1875 and devoted all his energy to the further promotion of turbines. And by the turn of the new century, Escher Wyss factory had largely abandoned ribbon weaving and began to focus on much larger projects such as production of large industrial turbines, and in 1907 became involved in the approval and concession process for the construction of a hydroelectric station near Dahlgren am Rhein, as mentioned in a Basel document, Switzerland, from 1925. By 1920, the Escher Wyss factory found itself in serious financial difficulties. The Treaty of Versailles had limited Germany's military and economic development after the Great War, and the Swiss company found the downturn in neighboring nations' national projects too much to bear. Ostroso, the Escher Wyss parent branch located in Zurich and founded in 1805, and the company, which still benefited from the good reputation and a history spanning more than a century, were deemed too important to lose. In December 1920, a reorganization took place with the share capital reduced from 11.5 to 4.015 million French francs, which was later increased again to 5.515 million Swiss francs. Nevertheless, by the end of the 1931 fiscal year, the Escher Wyss company was still losing money. Until then, the factory continued to deliver large-scale construction contracts during the 1920s, as noted in official correspondence dated 1924, exchanged between William III, Prince of Thuringia, the Escher Wyss company, and the property manager data of the House of Thuringia, Julius Heller. This document refers to the general terms and conditions of the Association of German Hydro Turbine Manufacturers for delivery of engines and other equipment for hydroelectric power stations. It also confirmed in a pamphlet on the agreement of the Association of German Hydro Turbine Manufacturers for the installation of turbines and spare engines with the German Reich, printed March 20th, 1923, in an advertising pamphlet by Escher Weiss for an oil pressure regulator. After the Great Depression of the early 1930s had devastated the world economy, Escher Weiss announced that the disastrous development of the economic situation in relation to currency is abating. The company, Escher Weiss, is temporarily unable to continue its current obligations in various customer countries. The company also revealed that it would seek a court adjournment to the Swiss newspaper Neue Zürcher Nachrichten, which reported on December 1st, 1931, that Escher Weiss has obtained a stay of bankruptcy order until the end of March 1932, and acting as receiver in Switzerland, a trust company. The article optimistically stated that there should be a prospect of continued business. In 1931, Escher Weiss employed approximately 1,300 non-contract workers and 550 employees. In the mid-1930s, Escher Weiss again found itself in financial trouble. This time, a consortium was formed in order to save the troubled engineering company. The consortium was formed in part by the Swiss Federal Bank, coincidentally headed by one Max Schwab, no relation to Klaus Schwab, and further restructuring took place. In 1938, it was announced that the company engineer, Colonel Jacob Schmidt-Heine, would become the new chairman of Escher Weiss Board of Directors. Shortly after the outbreak of the war in 1939, Schmidt-Heine was quoted as saying, "The outbreak of war does not necessarily mean a lockout of the machine industry in a neutral country, while quite the contrary. Escher Weiss and its new management were apparently eager to profit from the war, paving the way for its transformation into the major Nazi military contractor." A brief history of the Jewish persecution in Ravensbrück. When Hitler came to power, many things changed in Germany, and the history of the people of Ravensbrück during that time is a sad one, but it was not the first time the anti-Semitism had raised its head in the region. There's a lot here about what happened during the Second World War. I'm not going to go into that because it's just, we know most of what happened. Now, with the horrible Nazi crimes. And I'm skipping to Eugene Schwab went on to manage the National Socialist Model Company. Escher Weiss and the Swiss company helped the Nazi Wehrmacht produce important war weapons as well as more basic armaments, and the company was a leader in large turbine technology for hydroelectric dams and power plants, and also made components for German fighter aircraft, and intimately involved in much darker projects going on behind the scenes. That could have changed the outcome of World War II. And there's various files here as to what happened, what was going on. This is basically about the history of the Second World War and Klaus Schwab's Eugene Schwab. He would dutifully maintain company status quo during the war years, and after that, with young Klaus Martin Schwab, born in 1938, and his brother Urs Rainer Schwab a few years later, Eugene wanted to keep his children out of harm's way. Klaus Martin Schwab, man of mystery, internationally born March 30th, 1938, Ravensbrück, Germany. Klaus Schwab was the eldest child in a normal nuclear family. Between 1945 and 47, he attended elementary school in Au. Klaus Schwab recalled in a 2006 interview with the Irish Times that after the war, he said, "I was president of the Franco-German Regional Youth Association. My heroes were Adenauer, de Gasperi, and de Gaulle." Klaus Schwab and his younger brother, Urs Rainer Schwab, were to follow the footsteps of their grandfather Gottfried and their father Eugene, and would initially train as engineers. Klaus' father had told the young Schwab that if he wanted to make any impact on the world, then he should train as mechanical engineer. That would be just the beginning of Schwab's university credentials. And he says he began studying at Spahn Gymnasium in Ravensbrück. Schwab also worked in 1965 for his doctorate at ETH Zurich, writing the thesis on long-term export credit as a business problem in mechanical engineering. he received his PhD in engineering from Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich in 1966. At that time, Klaus' father, Eugene Schwab, was swimming longer circles than he had swum before. Having been a well-known figure of Ravensburg, Eugene would eventually be elected as pre-president of the city's Chamber of Commerce. In 1967, Klaus Schwab earned PhD in economics from the University of Fribourg, Switzerland, as well as a master's in public administration from John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard in the United States. While at Harvard, Schwab was tutored by Henry Kissinger. Okay, so Schwab was tutored by Henry Kissinger, who he would later say was among the top 3 to 4 people who have most influenced his thinking throughout his life. Henry Kissinger and his former student Klaus Schwab welcomed former UK Prime Minister Ted Heath to the WEF annual meeting in 1980, sourced from the World Economic Forum. And Klaus Schwab spoke of that period as a very important time in shaping his current ideological thinking, stating, "Years later, when I returned from the US after studying at Harvard, there were 2 events that had a decisive trigger for me. The first was a book by Jean-Jacques Servan-Schreiber, American Challenge, which said that Europe would lose to the US because of Europe's inferior management methods. The other was, and this is related to Ireland, when the Europe of 6 become the Europe of 9, these 2 events would help shape Klaus Schwab into a man who wanted to change the way people built their businesses." And then he became, of course, a technocrat. A lot of the history of his companies, his family company, the merger and reorganization of the Swiss engineering giants. And in 1967, Klaus Schwab officially burst into the scene of the Swiss business community, spearheading merger between Sulzer and Escher Weiss. Sulzer, we know, is a very big German company, as well as forming profitable alliances such as with Brown, Boveri, and others. And Klaus would speak in Zurich in front of leading Swiss engineering organizations during the event of the Employees Association of Swiss Machine Metal Manufacturers. And his speech was predicting the importance of integrating computers into modern Swiss engineering. This was back in 1971. Okay, Plutonium and Pretoria, Escher Weiss, his family's company, pioneered some of the most important technologies in electrical engineering, as the U.S. Department of Energy notes in its document on the supercritical development of the Brayton CO2 cycle, a device used in hydroelectric and nuclear power plants. Escher Weiss was the first to develop the turbine for this system, starting in 1939. The same document states that 24 systems were built by his family's company. Now, however, the arrival of the willing Schwab came the company's involvement in the illicit proliferation of nuclear weapons technology, and by 1969, the integration of Escher Weiss into Sulzer was fully completed, and they would be renamed Sulzer AG, dropping the historical Escher Weiss from its name. It was eventually revealed, thanks to a review and report by Swiss authorities, that a man named Peter Hoog, that Sulzer Escher Weiss secretly began procuring and manufacturing key parts for nuclear weapons in the 1960s. The company, while Schwab was on the board, he also became instrumental in developing of South Africa's illegal nuclear weapons program during the darkest years of the apartheid regime. So, okay, this has a lot to do with, okay, let's go to the United Nations Security Council, passed Resolution 418, imposing a mandatory arms embargo against South Africa, an embargo that would not be fully lifted until 1994. It's a very long article. Now, okay, it shows us how his family, now the Club of Rome and WEF, the most influential group behind the creation of Klaus Schwab's symposium was the Club of Rome, an influential think tank among scientists and economic elite that mirrors the WEF in many ways, including promoting a model of global governance led by technocratic elites. The Club of Rome has long been controversial for its obsession with reducing the world's population and many of previous policies. So as a whole, and in the interactions, these phenomena constitute a common threat that we must all face together. But in defining these dangers as enemies, we fall into a trap we've already warned readers about, that of confusing symptoms with causes. All these risks are caused by human intervention in natural processes, and only through changing attitudes and behavior can they be overcome. So the real enemy is humanity itself, they say. Now, the past as prologue, since the founding of World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab has become one of the most powerful men in the world, and his Great Reset has made control by the man on the throne of globalization more significant than ever. Is the real Klaus Schwab a kindly elderly uncle figure who wishes to do good for humanity, or is he really the son of a Nazi collaborator who used slave labor and aided Nazi efforts to obtain the first atomic bomb? As Klaus Schwab said in 2006, knowledge will soon be available everywhere. I call it the Google of globalization. It's not what you knew anymore, it's how you use it. You have to be the pace setter. Klaus Schwab considers himself the setter and top player, and it must be said that his qualifications and experience are impressive. However, when it comes to practicing what you preach, Klaus has been revealed. One of the three biggest challenges on the World Economic Forum's priority list is nuclear non-proliferation, yet neither Klaus Schwab nor his father Eugene lived up to the same principles when they were working. It's exactly the opposite. In January 2021, Klaus Schwab announced that this is the year the World Economic Forum and its allies must rebuild trust with the masses. However, as Schwab continues to hide his history and his father's connection with the National Socialist Model Society, that was Escher Weiss during the 1930s and 40s, then people will have good reason not to trust him. They trust the underlying motivations of his highly anti-democratic Great Reset agenda. In the case of the Schwabs, the evidence does not simply point to poor business practices or some kind of misunderstanding of reality. Instead, the history of the Schwab family reveals a habit of collaborating with genocidal dictators for the basic motives of profit and power. In the case of Klaus Schwab himself, he seems to have helped wash away remnants of the Nazi era, namely his nuclear and population control ambitions, to ensure the continuation of a deeper agenda. Then, through the World Economic Forum, he helped restore eugenics-influenced population control policies in the post-World War II era, a time when revelations of Nazi atrocities quickly brought pseudoscience to the limelight. The final question to be asked about true motivations behind Schwab's actions may be the most important for the future of humanity. Is Klaus Schwab trying to create the Fourth Industrial Revolution, or is he trying to create the Fourth Reich? This is by Johnny Van Moore, and I've translated this for you from a Greek article. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support, and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box.